I kind of want to watch this.
This is Just Block, and after the recent announcement of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, it got me thinking about Souls-like games. I tend to play more fighting games than any other genre, but Souls-likes have always had a tender spot in my heart. The growth and progression is so heavily reliant on the player's own personal development. By the end of Dark Souls, sure, you do a shit ton of damage, but really, you're just a much better player. And if you play through the game a second time, you will feel it in full swing. Now, I'm going to make a claim that might sound a little outlandish and baseless, but just give it a chance, alright? Welcome to Dark Souls is a Fighting Game.
Is that the Grand Theft Auto theme song?
When I claim that Dark Souls is a fighting game, I know that some of you fellas ran to the comments to say, no, it's not, it's a third-person action RPG. If you're one of those people, I'd like to politely request you to get off my channel and go experience the love of a woman. If you're not one of those
He's
people,
not wrong about
what's
that.
good, dude? How you doing? Anyway, let's first establish exactly what a fighting game is. Firstly, it's a fight between two or more things, which can be a player and a player and an AI, or even two AIs. Good example of this is Mugen. If you haven't heard of it, it's an absolutely unhinged fighting game where every single character is broken beyond belief. And so what people do is they have two AIs fight each other with different characters and then place bets on which one's gonna win. So off the bat we can establish that fighting games are not exclusively a PvP experience. They're certainly known for that, but it's not required. Well,
I don't know if I agree with this take.
Lots of games involve fighting.
I don't know
That's
if I
way
agree
too
with this
broad.
take.
Is it the combos? Is it the special moves? Well, no, because there are games like Dive Kick where there are no special moves and certainly no combos. You jump around the screen and try to dive kick your opponent. If you get hit, you die. It's pretty straightforward. So it's not the combos and it's not the special moves.
The hell kind of game is that? Have you guys heard of that? I don't know anything about the FGC.
There are fighting games that are more than just 1v1. We have team fighters like Marvel vs. Capcom and Dragon Ball FighterZ. There's also 3D fighters and arena fighters, so we know it's not the dimensions of the fight either. I would define a fighting game based on 5 key components that are present in every single fighting game, regardless of the systems. These include neutral, offense, defense, wake up, or ground game, whatever you want to call it, and a win condition. But Aaron, in Dive Kick you die instantly. How can you have an offense or a ground game if you die in one hit? Yeah, okay, you got me. There are some exceptions. Now pipe down in the comment section, I'm gonna go grab my paddle, alright? Anyway, I'm gonna prove Dark Souls has all of these. Neutral! This is by far the most important element to every fighting game in existence. This defines how every fighting game feels in your hands. Neutral is the fight to gain an advantage in some way, while both opponents are at equal footing. This involves rallying for space and positioning that is better than your opponent's. So, for the mouth breathers who need further explanation, let's use Street Fighter as an example. Before anyone gets hit, we both start moving.
I love
I'm
fighting
trying
games.
to place myself in the right position so that you can't hit me, but if you miss, I can hit you. That's called footsies.
That was footsies.
It gives me an advantage. At the same
Brian
time
F was
of
so
spacing
excited there.
around my opponent, I'm also trying to position better in relation to the corner. The corner restricts your movement so that the other player gets to decide the spacing, once again giving you advantage. Now, does Dark Souls have a neutral? Absolutely, champ, that's why I'm making the video. In a Souls-like game, the neutral is going to present itself in a similar
That's
way.
Elden Ring. Okay,
Before
so he's talking
Mr.
about Elden
Player
Ring as
or
well.
the
He includes.
boss
He's talking
is
about the whole
spawned.
series.
They try to position. The boss walks towards you and you walk away from the walls of the arena. Now the positioning in these games isn't quite as important as the corner in something like a 2D fighter, because the boss generally doesn't give a fuck about a corner, but for you, if you get wedged in there, good luck, buddy. Now the other part about neutral also comes up in Dark Souls very heavily. The bosses all have a particular range where they thrive. Vort in Dark Souls 3 is a perfect example. He has very strong moves from mid-range that can be harder to predict, but he's also got this little crevice underneath him where he gets awfully confused if you stand directly in there. The neutral of this fight comes down to trying to stay in that little pocket as long as you can so that he can't touch you at all. Another good example is circle strafing around the boss. All good Souls players know that it is often much safer to be behind the big scary man than in front of the big scary man. Many bosses also have moves that attack that space behind them, so the neutral is shaken up a little bit. You can't feel safe directly behind them.
I remember when I first played Elden Ring, it
check
took
that
me
off the
like
list.
50
Dark
tries
Souls
to beat
got neutral.
Margaret.
Good stuff. If neutral is defined as before anyone has advantage, then offense can be described as after someone has secured advantage. We all know it when we see it, but it's different from game to game. It can range from block string mix-ups and fast-paced anime games, or spacing and strike throw like in Street Fighter. In Dark Souls, offense is pretty similar, although there is no traditional mix-up. It's pretty straightforward as it either hit or it didn't hit. Dark Souls is almost exclusively based on whiff punishment and timing. Your goal is to make the boss whiff something.
Look at that whiff punish right there.
Whiff punishment and timing. Your goal is to make the boss whiff something so that you can squeeze in some damage of your own. The offense revolves around
this is true. This is all facts what he's saying.
As much damage as you can before the boss is ready to swing at you. Think of it kind of like blackjack. When I make an opening, it's my turn to swing. And I can swing and swing as much as I like, but if I go over 21, I bust and I get smacked by the boss. Now, once you've learned the bosses and know their timings, like
hold on,
backwards
chat,
and
1 second.
forwards,
Sorry.
this kind of like falls apart. But for most players, the offense is a bit of a guessing game. You whiff punish and then swing, swing, swing until you gotta get out of dodge. There's also the added mechanic of posture breaking and staggering, which gives you more incentive to keep swinging until you can finally get that stagger. We'll talk about that more in the knockdown section, but for offense, put it on the board. Defense goes hand in hand with offense. If your opponent secured an advantage and they are now doing
Shank, you gotta send me a link for that. I don't know what that is.
Makes sense, right? Offense and defense come with the inherent concept of risk and reward. Some options on offense will be risky and some will be safer. And the same goes for defense. Some defensive options are very low risk and some can be very high risk. In Dark Souls, the bosses tend to have very limited defensive options. There are some bosses that come strapped with like a shield, or maybe they're a hunter in Bloodborne and they can parry you, shoot you in the face. These exist but are not.
God damn, was that a pirate?
Mostly bosses will maybe have an attack that moves them far away and returns the fight to neutral. It's also very common for bosses to have
imagine
like
a pirate game like Elden Ring though,
big AoE
with the
blast
style of Elden Ring.
to run away while they're doing it. As for the player, it depends on the game, but FromSoft likes to give lots and lots of defensive options to the player. You can take your pick in most Souls-like games. If you'd like to just avoid damage straight up and be invincible for a second, there's a dodge roll. The risk here being that if you mistime it, you're open to taking damage while you're recovering. The biggest risk option in most From Software games is the parry. It tends to have massive reward in giving you a counterattack right away for precise timing, but if it's misplaced, then you suffer a very long recovery time and you're going to get smacked. The least risky option in most cases is block. You can trade some stamina to reduce damage, but you don't receive hardly any reward for just blocking. The defensive mechanics tend to shape what offense looks like in most games. In Dark Souls' case, defense is very powerful, but bosses have crazy powerful offense as well. To stop their offense, you're forced to take risk and be precise.
Millennia.
So clearly Dark Souls has
God.
some defense as well. So let's check that off the list.
I gotta do a new rerun of Elden Ring.
Knockdown is a very strong driving force in the fighting game genre. Whether it's present in the traditional sense or it's something a little bit different, it changes the tempo and flow of a match drastically. Some games don't want the knockdown situation to be very important, so it's kind of normalized. Some games are like Guilty Gear, and they're putting a projectile on your forehead and making you guess 50-50 every time you wake up. So, wake up can be described as the situation that follows after somebody successfully wins on offense. Now, I know not every offensive situation leads to a knockdown in every fighting game, but let me be general to explain the damn concept, alright? Shut up. You win heavy on offense, they get smacked, splat on the ground.
Thank you, Shake.
and
We'll
now
check
it's
that
your
out in a
turn
second.
once again. And they're forced into defense right away. Almost every fighting game has
I'll never
their
play
own
Mortal
version
Kombat.
of this. Even games like platform fighters like Smash has the ledge, which is kind of similar to a wake-up situation. No, I'm not going to talk about dive kick, shut up. So what's knockdown look like in Dark Souls then? Well, when the boss gets a knockdown, it really sucks. They're allowed to just keep swinging with absolutely uninterruptible attacks.
This
and
boss
you have to
is
find a way to
crazy.
stand up and avoid them. Most of the
This
time,
boss
if you
is
get knocked down
crazy.
in Dark Souls, I just assume you're boned.
Well, we're boned.
The player also has their own version of knockdown, or stagger, posture break, whatever. Basically, the boss goes, "Hoo!" and crumples over for a minute, looking like they just stubbed their toe, they gotta hold their knee.
The Peter Griffin.
So this gives the player an extended offensive situation. Once again, you're allowed to swing until
Yo,
the boss
this
stands
right
up
here was
and
my
goes,
play style
"Hey,
in
man,
Elden
that's
Ring."
not cool. Sometimes they also give you a visceral attack, which adds to the sort of guessing game of how long you're allowed to swing before, you decide to take the visceral attack and end your offense phase. But okay, once again, Dark Souls has a knockdown for the boss and the player, so let's check another box. Now, finally, what it's all about. I need the win, baby! Every game has a win condition. Most of the time, it's pretty straightforward. Make their health bar go to 0. Sometimes you gotta shoot them off the map into an endless abyss if you're playing a platform fighter. Sometimes you gotta make it impossible for their king to move. Chess is also a fighting game. In Dark Souls, either
He just
die,
whispered chess is also a fighting game. That's hilarious.
or you vanquish them or whatever. So, win condition. But alright, so that's all of the core concepts. Dark Souls
Alright,
has
I think he
neutral,
deserves
has
a
an offensive
subscription.
defense, a wake-up situation, and
I think he
there's
deserves a
win
subscription.
condition.
His
And it's
videos are cool. They're pretty entertaining. Some good stuff. I think chess is a fighting game. That's my hot take for this one. Chess is a fighting game.